Hello there friends, it's Ashley here from the Loopy Lamb and theloopylamb.com, and this week we are starting week 3 of our Amigurumi Advent Calendar Crochet Along. If this is your first time on the channel and you haven't heard of this before, we are doing a year-long Amigurumi Crochet Along where we create a doll and an Advent calendar that is filled with toys and garments to be gifted at the end of the year. And you can check out weeks 1 and 2 videos here on the channel in order to catch up with us if you'd like to crochet along with us. To follow along with us today, we are going to be needing to have the skin toned yarn that we used for our doll. And again, I'm still using that Brava worsted weight yarn in the color almond. You're going to need the hook that you've been using for your doll so far. And again, I've been using that 3.5 millimeter or E hook. You're going to also need a tapestry needle, some black embroidery thread or whatever color embroidery thread you'd like to use for your eyelashes. And you don't need to have this, but I find it adds a really fun little touch. We're going to be adding some blush to our dolls as well today as creating the eyelashes and our arms for our dolls. So if you would like to add blush to your doll, I'll be showing you how to apply that today. And I've just got a old blush makeup brush, and this is just a cheap blush I found on Amazon. It's called Elf in Blushing. That's the color Blushing. So if you wanted to get that exact one. But anyways, that's the materials that we're going to need. I'm going to clear my space now, and we will begin by working on the arms for our doll. All right, my space is all cleared and I'm ready to get started. If you are ready to get started on the arms for your doll, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to this channel. I forgot to mention in the list of materials that you'll need. You'll also need a stitch marker to keep track of the first stitch of your round, or a scrap piece of yarn, whatever your preference is there. To do our magic circle, we're going to hold our yarn tail down like so. We're going to grab the working yarn and wrap it around our fingers and create an X. Then we're going to flip our hand over and we're going to pin the working yarn in place with our ring fingers here. Then we're going to insert our hook under the first strand, grab that second strand and pull it under the first strand, and then we're going to twist our hook like this to create a loop. Then we're going to take the tip of our hook, grab that working yarn and pull it through the loop, locking it in place. And there is our adjustable ring. To start with round 1 of our arm, we're going to place 6 single crochets into the magic circle. We're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and there's our single crochet. And we'll do this 5 more times. We're going to pull that ring taut. Have your stitch marker handy. And I'm now just realizing I forgot to mention stuffing. We're going to need stuffing for our arms, of course. So I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. So we're ready to start with round 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to place 2 single crochets, also called a single crochet increase, into each stitch around. So we're going to work into that first stitch. There's our first single crochet. Make sure that you have that stitch marker handy because we're going to place that into that stitch. We're going to move it up to mark the first stitch of each subsequent round. And we're going to work back into that same stitch and work another single crochet. And we're going to place 2 single crochet stitches into each stitch of this round. At the end of the round, we should have 12 single crochets. For rounds 3 through 20 of the arm, we're going to place 1 single crochet into each stitch of the round. So at the end of every round, you should still have those 12 single crochets. So if you'd like to pause your video and come back to me after you've done rounds 3 through 20, I'll be waiting here for you. And before you go, I just want to mention that you'll need your stuffing that you've been using for your doll, and I recommend stuffing your arms as you work so that way you get a nice even stuff on your arm. So again, just make sure you're adding that stuffing as you work, as you're working rounds 3 through 20, and come back to me when you're ready to see how to finish them off. So I've just finished round 20 of my arm, and it's stuffed up and ready to go. And so I'm going to finish off my arm, and I'm going to cut a tail probably about 10 to 15 inches long. And then I'm going to pull the yarn all the way through. You can remove that stitch marker now. And I'm going to grab my tapestry needle here, and I'm going to thread the tail onto the tapestry needle. So I have my tail threaded onto my tapestry needle here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten the top of the arm, making sure that the stuffing is well inside the arm. It's not going to hinder me in any way. And I'm going to flatten the top of the arm so I can see where the tops of the stitches will line up. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whip stitch the top of the arm closed by working through the tops of the stitches. Now, when I'm finished going through the tops of the stitches here, I'm going to grab my doll and bring it on over. If you have some sewing pins handy, they come in really, really handy for this next step. It's absolutely not necessary. I just personally find it very helpful in making sure that my arms line up appropriately, and I'm saving myself some time from potentially having to rip those out and reposition them, because I'm going to make my arms and then I use these pins to position them, and I'll be able to kind of move them around and get a little finicky about it until I'm very confident with where I want them to be placed, and then I sew them onto the arms or onto the body. And I keep those pins in place as I'm sewing and remove them as I work, so that way they help also to hold them in place. So now that I've got my arm finished, I'm going to line the top of that arm up with the round that's one round below the narrowest part of the neck. And so looking at my doll, this is the narrowest part of the neck, and then one round down is right here. So you can use your tail and sew that on, or if you're like me, I'm going to just tack that in place with some with some pins until I have both my arms, and that way I can find the best placement for them. So you're going to need to make 2 of these arms. So if you need to rewind the video and watch rounds 1 through 20 of the arm, making a second arm again, and then you'll follow this same process. Whip stitch the top of the arm closed, and then you can pin your second arm in place, or just sew them on if you're experienced with this and you're confident in your placement, and then you're done with your arms. And so if you'd like to do that and pause and come on back to me, I will show you next how to add the nose to our doll. So we are going to be embroidering the nose for our doll onto its face. And to do that, we're going to need a length of yarn. I've cut about 20 inches here. You may use a little more or less depending on your preference of how you'd like your nose to look. But I always tend to go a little more than I know I'm going to need, just to make sure that if I decide I want more, I've got it available for me. So I've already taken the time to thread this onto a tapestry needle. I've got a bent tip here. They're very handy for this kind of work. And I have tied a small knot into the opposite end of my yarn. Now you can do this with the hair cap on or off. Mine is already put on here with pins, so I can move it on or off if I need to, but I'm just going to do it here with it on. So you're going to start by taking the tip of your needle and finding the space between some stitches anywhere on the head. I like to start from behind the head because I'm going to be pulling the needle through the front of the face. Now I'm going to be wanting to come out in round 30, and we know that our eyes were placed in round 32, so I can go count down 2 rows. There's 31 and 30, and we're going to want to come out relatively central to that area, and we're going to be sewing or embroidering over 4 stitches. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pull that yarn until the knot is inside the head. So you can see that it's no longer visible outside. And from where I've come out, I'm going to count over 4 stitches. So there's, 3 stitches because I want to go across 4. So here's the first 1, 2, 3, 4. So the stitch you came out of with your needle counts as the first stitch. And so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to insert my needle tip into that 4th stitch, and I'm going to have it come back out my first stitch, like so. Now I'm going to pull my yarn, and that is the start of our nose. So this is where the amount of yarn that you'll use for this varies, because we're just going to keep going over that same spot over and over again until we get a nose that we're happy with. For me, sometimes it's between 8 and 10 repeats. Sometimes I'm not happy until they've got quite a large nose. It just really depends on your personal preference. You don't want to pull on this too hard. You just want them to sit flush against the face, because if you do pull too hard, you are going to start puckering your fabric, and it can be a little tricky, depending on how tight you've pulled, to correct that. Especially if you've pulled tight enough that you've actually pulled your stitches out of shape. So I'm just kind of using my finger to help that along and make sure it's nice and flush. Oh, I think I'm almost there with the nose this time. I'm going to do one more. And so I'm taking my needle here and pushing it under the strands of yarn, which kind of helps make sure that they're not too taut and gives it a little bit of dimension here. And also if you have any looser or tighter strands than others, then it'll help to even those out as well. I'm not super thrilled with my embroidery on this time, but I think I'm going to try for one more. And the beauty of this is if you don't love it, you can pull it out and do it all over again. So I have my nose just the way I like it here, and now I'm ready to finish off. Now I'm going to have my needle and I'm going to put it back into the head and have it come out some other point in the doll's head near the back. And again, I'm going to come out through a hole of the stitch. We don't want to come through the actual yarn because we don't want to split it or damage it in any way. So we're going to pull that all the way through. Make sure that it doesn't indent your face at all. If it does, you can use that tip of your needle to very gently pull that back into shape. And now I will tie a knot in my yarn close to the fabric of our doll's head here. And I like to do a double knot. And then I'm going to put my tapestry needle back through that same hole that I came out of, out through another hole somewhere in the doll's head, ideally on the opposite side of the head. There we go. And I'm going to pull that, and I'm going to pull that yarn until that knot goes inside to the doll's head. And again, if it dents my fabric at all, just use the tip of my needle to go underneath the fabric and very gently lift that back. And if you'd like, you can do that more than once. I'm satisfied with just the one time here. And then I'm going to cut my yarn. I'm going to pull that slightly and cut close to the fabric. So when I cut, the end goes back inside the head. And that's it. That's how you'll embroider your nose for our doll. And next we'll be working on doing the embroidery for the eyes. To do that, we're going to need some black embroidery thread, as well as our tapestry needle and our scissors. So now that our doll has a nose, it's time to give her some eyelashes. There are simpler ways to do eyelashes than the one I'm going to show you here, but I really like the addition that the way we're doing the embroidery today gives to the face. It gives it a little bit more character, and it's really only a little bit more effort. So what I've got here is about probably all in all 40 inches of black embroidery thread that I've doubled over. So I'm holding it double. I have it threaded onto a tapestry needle with a couple of knots here in the end. And to start, we're going to take our needle, and in the same manner that we started the nose, we're going to come through the back of the head. And our aim for where we want to come out is the centermost stitch directly to the center of the eye right here. So we're going to bring our needle up and through. And that can be a little tricky sometimes, especially if your eyes have larger backs on them. You might have to come in from a different angle to get there than the one I'm using. So we're going to pull that knot into the head. I can't pull mine all the way in without fear of pulling it all the way through, so I'm going to have to snip that end later, which is fine. So now that we have come out through this eye, we're going to take our embroidery thread and we're going to lay it around the curve at the top of the eye, like so. I find this super helpful to lay my other finger over top of that embroidery thread to help keep it in place because we really don't want it to go anywhere during this next step. So the next step is we're going to insert the tip of our tapestry needle in through the outermost stitch on the center point of the eye. And then the next step would be to come out this stitch directly next to it. If you want really big dramatic eyelashes, you can come out 2 stitches over and have bigger, more dramatic eyelashes, but I like to come out in the stitch directly next to it. And then again, I'm still holding that embroidery thread up at the top here as I pull this through. And now we don't want to pull it too tight because we don't want it to disappear behind the eye. Now, if you're finding that the embroidery thread is disappearing behind your eye, you can loosen it up a bit with your tapestry needle here until it sits at a point that you like. I like it there. And now we're going to bring our tapestry needle back into the first stitch, and then we're going to come up and out through this stitch directly above the stitch we're currently have our embroidery through. So I'll demonstrate that by we're going to go in back through the same stitch we were just in. Then we're going to come back out. Goodness, I'm all thumbs today. Here we go. We're going to come out this stitch here. All right. And you can see we've got our first eyelash done. And now we're going to go back into that same stitch we just started in. And now from this point, you can either pull the needle out through the back, finish off, and then start on your second eye, or you can go back through this stitch and then have the tip of your needle come out over here on the center point of this eye and start your embroidery for the second eye, so you don't have to start and finish twice. Okay, so I'm just going to come in out here and come out on this side here. And so sometimes I like to just kind of fiddle around with the threads until I find that I'm happy with its placement. Like in this strand here, I pulled this a little too tight. So I'm just going to use my tapestry needle to kind of even that out. And that's your eyelashes. And so you'll just repeat these steps, but mirrored on the other side. And then you'd finish it off in the same way we did with our nose. Tie a knot and pull that knot through the head once or twice, and then finish off by cutting your thread. And that's how you do the eyelash embroidery. And so I'm going to finish off with my other eye here, and then I'll come back and show you how to add the cheeks to our doll. So now that we have done our arms, our nose, our embroidery for our eyelashes, it is time to add some blush to our doll. Now, again, this is absolutely optional if you don't want to do this. The blush is not permanent. It does wear off over time, but it is a nice thing that I like to add once in a while. So if you're wanting to do that, you do need some blush and an old makeup brush, or you can even use an old paintbrush if it's clean enough. And it's very simple. It's no harder than applying it to your own face if you use this product. I just would caution you not to go too heavy, because you can put it on, but you can't take it off. So what I like to do is I like to just, tap mine very gently. And unfortunately, I dropped mine just before starting this video. So it is not in the best shape. Right, and then I'm going to tap off any excess. And then I'm going to take a look at my doll and locate where I'd like to put it. I like to put it just below the eye and off to the side a little bit. And then I'm just going to, you can either dab or brush. I like to personally dab mine like this. Now, darker color for this colored yarn would have been a little bit better, but I'm just using what I have on hand. And once you're happy with it, you can move on to your second cheek. And I try to find a similar location on the other side. If you are going to brush, do it in circular motions and try to limit how much you do that so you're not completely potentially wrecking your fabric and pilling it up or roughing it up too much. My goodness. See, now I've done a little too much on that side, so I'm just going to blow some off. Use my hand, and that's not too bad. And there is her blush. Like I said, something a little darker for this colored yarn probably would have been better, but you can use pretty much whatever color you'd like. And that's how you add blush to our Amigurumi doll. And now, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and please consider subscribing to this channel. Next week, we will be starting on our first part of an outfit for our dolls. And I will see you back here next week. So thanks so much for watching, friends. If you enjoy free crochet patterns, please check out my blog at theloopylamb.com. And if you're wanting to see the full schedule for our Amigurumi Advent Calendar Crochet Along, it can also be found on my blog, as well as the information if you'd like to find this pattern in writing in the pattern bundle. As all the information, again, is at the blog, theloopylamb.com. Thanks so much for watching, friends. Happy hooking, and I'll see you next time.